Well, listen, I'm John Rhys-Davies. I'm an actor, and some of you know me from Lord of the Rings or Raiders of the Lost Ark. So, still got a few people coming in, but that's all right. Why don't we just start with a few questions? Who's got a question? Are there people with questions? Yes.
I'm going to clear my throat. I just want to say thank you for coming. And I was curious, what was your experience like working on Gargoyles?
Gargoyles?
Yes. Loved you as Macbeth.
Macbeth, yes. First of all, the actual history of Macbeth in Gargoyles is more accurate than Shakespeare's. It's very, very accurate. And that was one of the great joys of doing it. I thought, gosh, is this really good? Is this accurate? And it really was. Except the business about Demona and that sort of thing. No other I named her. Yes, wonderful. Of course, you're working in a studio, so sometimes there are other people there, sometimes there aren't. But great fun, great fun. I liked doing that. And it's a jolly good show, I think. Yes. Anyway, all right, another question.
Good afternoon, Gimli. I watch Lord of the Rings once a year. I just got done reading the books with a friend. So since I'm dressed as Aragorn, my question to you is, what is your favorite memory of working with Viggo Mortensen?
Viggo Mortensen is one of them, is a Renaissance man, really. Viggo can do everything. If he wasn't an actor, he would be what he is, actually. He is a very well exhibited photographer. His photographs sell for a lot of money. You remember that film that he did with Michael Douglas, where he was he was having an affair with his wife, and they were going to kill. He got persuaded to try and kill Gwyneth Paltrow. I can't remember what it was called, but there's a shot there where the young man, who is the artist who's having the affair with Gwyneth Paltrow, we see a little bit into his studio, and we see a great array of pictures. They were all painted by Viggo. He's also a damn good poet. And of course, he's a superb actor. But he's such a well-rounded fellow. We found ourselves in South Island in a most beautiful location. And we all got out of the bus, having traveled 3 hours to get there. And we all looked around and said, wow. But nobody's going to believe that a place can be really as beautiful as this. They're going to say that's a backdrop. And then everybody got back on the bus to go back, and Viggo and I decided we didn't want to spend the entire evening traveling back and forwards to the hotel, which was 3 hours away. So he and I decided we'd stay. We had our trailers there, but they said, we haven't got any food, we haven't got any food. And I said, don't worry about that. And Viggo says, leave it to me. So Viggo always takes his fishing rod, and he's a darn good trout fisher. So he caught 2 trout for our dinner. We cooked it over the fire and gazed at the stars. You may take it from that I somewhat admire the man.
Thank you very much.
Greetings. You also had 2 productions with Sir Patrick Stewart back in a long time ago, I, Claudius and 4 of Eagles. But in I, Claudius, you got to kill Patrick Stewart. How was that?
Very satisfying.
That's it.
Hello. If your character Gimli was a candy flavor, what candy would he be?
Well, something you'd have to just have more of, I think, you know. There are some flavors, there are some flavors that are so good, you get right through the packet. And you never get through Gimli's packet, that's for sure. Yes.
So Lord of the Rings uses a lot of forced perspective filming. Being one of the tallest in the cast and being one of the shortest in the fellowship, how did it feel like working with that and like having to shoot shots in that kind of perspective?
Well, right at the beginning, it was really. Oh, let me explain. Okay, the first shot of my film in New Zealand, I'm on my knees, right? So I'm like this. I've got all the makeup on. It's taken 8 hours. I've got the helmet on my head. I have the axe, and it's a close-up. Well, it's a sort of close-up, and I'm going. So I go. The helmet is down there, and the makeup is ruined. Okay, back to square one then. Well, we had lots of tricks, and Jackson is a supreme and superb filmmaker. He knows every trick in the book. He has the full palette that a director needs to be a great director. Let me give you a sort of illustration. Imagine this is a platform, yeah? We've got a platform going right across there, and on it we put a 6'8" basketball player who's now a policeman in New Zealand. And I'm walking beside him now. So my head is approximately where his waist is. Right? Now we give him a big belt. We know a belt is only that big, but this belt is that big, right? And we know a scabbard is only about that big, but we give him one that big. So here I am, walking along beside this big belt, bit scabbard. We don't see the top of him. We see his knees, and we see the upper thigh, his upper thigh. And I'm walking like that, talking. And I'm just talking to him up there, and that gives you the illusion, because we know that a belt isn't that thick. It makes me smaller. It's an extraordinary illusion. It works wonderfully well. But there were things that still puzzled me. I remember sitting with Ian McKellen watching the first of the dailies that we got to see. And there's that moment where a little Frodo jumps into the cart with big Ian, and we both went. And I turned to Ian and I said, "How did you do that?" He said, "I don't know." Right, thank you. That's not really an answer, but I try to avoid answering questions. Right.
It looks like I get to be a rock star with a microphone here. Hi, I'll do the other fellow better. I was a Lord of the Rings nerd before being a nerd was cool. I've read the book every year since I was about 14, and that is an extremely long time now. I wanted to know, kind of a segue onto the last question. We hear a lot about the members of the fellowship getting together for reunions. Do you also keep in touch with your scale doubles? For instance, Brett Beatty for yourself?
Well, not so much, because they really do live in New Zealand. I have a home in New Zealand, and I have hiding behind stage, I have my New Zealand-born daughter. But I don't get in touch with them. I mean, little Shah sometimes I get to see. But you know, film is one of those international communities where you wander around the world and you're constantly bumping into somebody you worked with 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago. And it's really wonderful when that happens. I'm sorry that I haven't a more positive thing. I run into the bloody hobbits all the time. And they are still such a close-knit group of friends. It's wonderful. I will say that filming Lord of the Rings was extraordinary in the level of enthusiasm and passion that the New Zealanders had. The cast, the crew, the director, the writers, everyone involved with that was so committed and happy and delighted to be working, and that delight really comes right through the film, I think. There was only one miserable old SOB on the production, and I wore his boots every day, I'm afraid. Next question.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of yours in Shogun and Return of the Incredible Hulk, but I think my favorite role is Maximilian Arturo from Sliders. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what attracted you to that show, and then what caused you to, obviously split. Some of the turmoil in that.
Sorry, wait.
What attracted you to the show Sliders that made you want to do it, and then obviously what caused you to want to leave?
Well, I thought Sliders was a brilliant idea. I still do. I think the problem was the studio didn't realize the potential of it. They didn't realize that they'd actually got a franchise there that could have rivaled Voyager, Star Trek, those things. I think it could still be on the air. I mean, you can go anywhere in space and anywhere in time. So when one of the writers actually said to me, "You're being very hard on the writers. It's hard to come up with ideas for this show." I looked at him incredulously and said, "You can go anywhere in space and anywhere in time and you find it hard to come up with ideas? What the are you doing in show business?" But I blame myself partly because I should have been more patient. But really, I don't want a darn stupid producer to say, "John, all we want you to do is play the bad doctor in Lost in Space." I mean, if they told me that before, I wouldn't have bothered. I mean, but, and of course, actors do have a certain responsibility. I mean, to play a scientist or a lecturer, a professor or something like that, and to make them look like idiots is damaging to young people's perception of what science is. I remember being chased by a young man down westward in Los Angeles, and he caught up with me and he said, "Look, John, I teach physics at UCLA, and we often use sliders as an introduction into one of the paradoxes of physics, and relativistic time dilation, stuff like that." He said, "I beg you, do not make a mockery of science and scientists, because it is so hard getting young people involved in science and technology." I'm privileged now to be doing a little bit of work with NASA. NASA is one of the glories of mankind. It is one of the great... It is one of the greatest forces still of the American dream. Be damn proud of it. And that wonderful combination now between the commercial development of space and NASA is so marvelous. NASA does the real hard thinking and science. Build it, test it, put it together, test it with another component, build it, test it, make it work. That's how you get that extraordinary James Webb telescope into space. Something like about 170,000 actions that really have to take place sequentially. It is the most marvelous piece of advanced engineering we've ever put into space. And I had the privilege of meeting a man the other day who was part of the optical department. And he went in, he said, I went in early because we'd used cameras to set up the engineering so we could orientate the James Webb when we finally got it into position and open. And they were just watching, you know, making sure that bits of the machine were unfolding properly. He said, but we'd orientated it on a star so that we knew roughly where we were. What we'd forgotten was the cameras were still taking images of everything around the star. So there was going to be a dump of information. And he said, I went in so we could just dump the information before we could actually start looking at the universe that we saw. And he said, I switched on, and it was only then that I and the people who came in after me realized that the camera was catching images of the universe that had never been seen before. He said it was one of the most exciting moments of my life. You know, and that intellectual passion is as important as any of the other passions. And that is why those of us who teach and love teaching have to emphasize the glory and the significance of information. And why you younger people should really think about an adventure and a life in science if you could manage it. Be very proud, I am, just to be associated with it. So I don't really go for the lost in space doctor, the bad doctor.
Next. Hello. I am a third-generation Lord of the Rings fan. I picked it up when I was 7. Thank you so much for being so true and faithful to the story as so many of us were hoping and expecting would be able to be delivered to the screen. When I saw the first trailer for Fellowship and I saw the Fellowship coming through the notch in the Misty Mountains, I knew that it was going to be right, and you held that vision, all of you did, and I thank you so much for all of that. Thank you.
Well, I thank you. I mean, the real credit goes to Peter Jackson, doesn't it? Because everyone knew that this film could not be made. Tolkien knew it wasn't a film. Tolkien was using the sort of the structure of the Icelandic sagas for writing his book. I mean, if you look at Lord of the Rings, how does it go? Well, things are very nice, and then something odd happens. And then something odder happens. And then something not nice happens. And then things get a little bit worse. And then things get a lot of worse. And then there's a skirmish, and then things actually develop into a real terrorizing war. And then, so you've got this constant sort of downbeat thing in cinematic terms. Whereas in the Nordic saga, these things are known and recognized. I couldn't read Lord of the Rings before because I didn't understand that. It was only after my third reading that I got, that's what he's trying to do. But in terms of cinema, he certainly didn't believe. He sold it for very, very little money because he had a bill from our equivalent of your IRS. And so he knocked it out for some poor fool to try and make a film of it. And of course, I think Solzhenitsyn ended up with the rights. A very canny man, and who probably made billions out of it in the end. Anyway, I've lost my track. 1 second, yeah. So, we know that the film is really unfilmable. But it was Fran and Peter they essentially were the people who actually found a way through the story. And they knew what the characters were, and they were in love with those characters. And they wanted to bring them to life. But it is an act of creative genius to produce those scripts. I knew when I got offered the part, I thought, oh gosh, this is never going to happen. Okay, well, take the damn job. I get to spend a month in New Zealand and no one will know anyway. And then they offered me Gimli. What, with all that prosthetic makeup? Oh, don't worry, John, said my then manager. They say they can get it done in an hour. I said, you're lying to me and you have no idea. Yes, but as a matter of fact, I was with a new agent at the time, and he said, John, if you turn down this part, I don't think we can continue to represent you, which I thought was a bit tough. And then it was my number one son, Ben, who said, Dad, I think it'd be really stupid to turn this part down. And I said, why is that, son? He said, because just think, in every bookshop, in the English-speaking or any language-speaking world that reads books, there is that much space devoted to Tolkien's work in every bookshop. And I thought, actually, you got a point there. But all the credit, really, all the credit goes to Peter Jackson and his team, because they did everything right. There wasn't really a film industry in New Zealand, but this funny little man who walks up mountains in the snow in shorts had this vision. Now, he'd done one or two rather good films with 4 or 6 main characters. Let me tell you, anyone can direct a film with 4 to 6 characters if you've got 6 or 8 weeks to do it. Anyone can do it. Sadly, most of them try. But he didn't have a track record for something as huge as this. When you're in a really big show, there are 21 principal characters in this. There are hundreds of horses, canoes. When I sat in the set designer's office, the phone went, and he picked it up and he said, oh, really? Oh, thank you. He said, our architectural plans, that was the printer of them. He just said we've now got to 8 kilometers of architectural plans that he's printed. That was in the first show. Just genius. Organizational genius. If you're going to be a great producer, you have to have the imagination and the organizational skills of a Rommel. Because a film is an army on the march in unknown territory where something will go wrong, catastrophically wrong. When we did Shogun in Japan, there's a new Shogun out, as you guys know. We were meant to spend 3 weeks in Tokyo in the tanks shooting the sea sequences. This means that at least in those days, at least $1 million, $1.5 million, $2 million was already at risk down the tubes. They actually sent somebody out from I think it was MGM in those days, with authority to cut 1 hour out of the show. Actually, it's another story and I won't go there, but we got it back. So when we got to Queenstown, we moved the entire unit, all the principals, the fellowship, 200 horses, extras, stuntmen, and in South Island in those days, there was no real tourism industry, so they'd really had to phone people up and say, will you take a few people working on the crew and stay there and stay there. The actors are going to be in the hotel. Right, so we get to Queenstown. So there is the center of Queenstown, right? And here is the production office, 3 kilometers, okay? The snag is the rain, and then more rain. So the entire mountainside here collapses over the road, takes out 11 houses, and now, just for the actors to get to the production office, is 19 kilometers of one-way track. That was the day the famous call sheet went out saying there will be no filming tomorrow because the lake is underwater. Now, what do you do if you're a producer? You are in real trouble. They were so good that we did not, in fact, film that day when the lake was underwater. We all got into transportation and went up to a different part of New Zealand. And the following day, we started shooting another sequence over there. Let me tell you, on a scale like that, if your producers can't deliver the goods, then you dig a hole. And when you've got an 18-month shoot over basically 3 years, you know, once you get behind, you never get ahead again. And it was genius on the part of production that carried us through that time. It is the most remarkable film I've ever worked on, and I think it will be one of the great and abiding trilogies of all time. Thank you.
It already is. For 20 years, I think it's safe to say that it is.
Well, how are we doing for time? Hang on, before we get the next question. 14, 13. It's going down. We've only got to put up with you for another 15 minutes. Nearly 14.
Well, I guess I'll try to be brief. I'm going to go the Indiana Jones route with my question. I know in the first one, Sala sings a couple songs. Are those original to you, or were those like given to you, or those Egyptian songs that you sang?
I think Stephen and I had a little conversation early on. He said, "You sing?" And I said, "Only filthy rugby songs in the back of the line." And he said, "Well, you know, do you listen to music?" And I said, "Yes, of course." And he said, "What sort of music?" I said, "I'm a classical man, but, you know, Gilbert and Sullivan, anything like that." And I forgot about it. And then, so I arrived on my, you know, the way we shoot films, my first day on the film was the last scene I have in the film. So I arrive and there's Steven Spielberg sitting on the quayside in La Rochelle going, and I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm writing your scene." I said, "My scene says, Indy and Marion say a sorrowful goodbye to Salah." He said, "This is what I'm writing." I looked over his shoulder and I said, "He wouldn't say that. He'd be more inclined to say da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da." He looked at me and he said, "All right, da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da." All right, as soon as it's dark, we'll start, getting near to dark, we've got set up, we'll start shooting the scene. Oh, by the way, your character, when he's high or happy, he bursts into Gilbert and Sullivan. Incorporate that at the end of the scene, will you? I drew myself up to my full, then 6'1/2" and I started to say, "Mr. Spielberg, I am a classical actor. I need weeks and weeks to prepare." And I said, "All right."
Thank you.
Right, we're down to 12 minutes.
From Lord of the Rings, what is your favorite line and why?
What is my favorite line? Oh, there were so many of them. I mean, one of my favorite moments doesn't have a line in it. Well, it does actually. It is. Shall I get you a box? Favorite lines. Oh, not the beard. Now that was another one that we were doing a bit of green screen, and we had to do a little bit of jumping and things like that. And we were on platforms, and I was doing the jump, and I was acting. I wasn't really falling off the damn thing. But my acting must have been so convincing that my dear friend Legolas actually thought I was falling. So he grabbed me by the beard. And I grabbed his arm and said, "Not the beard!" It really irked me, you know. Sometimes actors cannot get their heads around certain words, and I had a thing. Ish kakwi aidurugnu. So, you know, we start doing the scene, and I say, Ish kakwi dairu. Ish kakwi aidurugnu, said somebody. Right, yeah, fine, I've got it. Okay, and take it. Okay, and Ishkak Ishkakuku Ishkaku. And they're all now saying it, you know, Ishkakui Daidu. And I say, shut up, for God's sake. I worked with the lovely Richard Chamberlain on the old Shogun, and Richard told me a story that he had. He was playing Dr. Kildare. Most of you are too young to remember Dr. Kildare. It was one of the greatest soaps of the time. Richard was new, he was about 22, he was desperately good looking. He was receiving, actually, 3,500 proposals of marriage a week. That's how popular he was. But he was working with a lot of older actors, Raymond Burr, and all these legendary Hollywood actors, all of whom were so skilled and accomplished. And he said it was really nerve-wracking because, you know, he knew every word because he knew that they didn't want to work. They would film on Tuesday and on Wednesday and Thursday, and Friday was the day that they would have to go into overage if they got behind, and they liked to be on the golf course on Friday. So, you know, he said, I was really professional. I'd studied, I was always prepared when I went in. I knew the words. And we had this new script about a new drug called epinephrine. He said, but I looked at the words and nobody had told me what it was, and so I thought, well, looks like it's epinephrine. So he said, I learned, and I used epinephrine on almost every page of the darn script. Let's try epinephrine. He said, but there I was saying epinephrine. So I go in, and of course, once somebody comes up to you and says, it's epinephrine. Oh, right, okay, then epinephrine. He said we went 3 days over because I could not get a single line out without stumbling and screwing it up. He said, I have never been more embarrassed in my life. I thought of that when I was doing Ishkak. I know what it is, shut up! Ishkakwi aidurugno.
How it was like to play both characters, given the Andrew beard.
Well, I thought I was doing rather well. I was quite happy. I made the realization that Peter Jackson really knew what he was doing. And I was one of the first people, I think probably the first people, to stand up in public and say, ladies and gentlemen of the press, revise your expectations upwards. 3 predictions. 1, this new film will be bigger than the new Star Wars. At which point Peter Jackson went, he was there like anyway, and I'd realized something about Gimli. Gimli is actually the most human character in the whole thing. It's an odd thing, but the others are rather specialized and rather perfect in their own ways. But Gimli is us, with our faults and what we hope will be our virtues. I mean, he is suspicious, paranoid, hostile, aggressive, dismissive of others, and yet he has the capacity to change. And that, I think, we latch on to more than anything else, because we see our own bad habits and our own bad behavior, and yet we still aspire to become better. And I think, in a way, Gimli does. The rest are pretty perfect anyway. They are what they are, but it's a bit of a struggle for a wee dwarf. So I was quite happy with doing Gimli, and then Peter said, would you like to do the voice of Treebeard? And I thought, ooh, more money. Yes, yes. It's not just the dwarves that are venal characters, actors too. I thought, oh gosh, this is easy. Come on, I've done lots of voiceover stuff, I can create this character. And then I read it, and read it again, and thought, how the hell does a walking, talking tree with no lungs, how does he sound? How can I get that part of the character to work? And then there's the different time rate. Books are marvelous. You can read something that is meant to be going extremely slowly, but you can read it quickly. But now, not so hasty, and you've lost the audience. How the heck do you get that sense of time? And what does a bloody walking tree, I am no tree, I am an ant, what does it sound like? Well, you've got age, and you've got, I thought we would try different registers. We recorded quickly and then slowed it down to make it sound like a whale talking. We tried everything. And I have to say, I still wake up at night in a cold sweat thinking, I've got to do that, and I don't know how to do it. In the end, you just have to compromise, and you make him a rather splendid old tree, really. I love the woods, and I love those little mice running over my toes, and the birds coming and telling me what they're up to in the trees. And that was the compromise, which many people like, but it's a compromise, and I had this problem. I went and did a talk show in New York with a guy who was a great fan of Lord of the Rings. And he said, look, I've got 2 or 3 friends of mine who are real scholars of Tolkien, and they will advise you. He came back to me and he said, okay, he said, well, we've had one answer. He said, this friend of mine, who is a Tolkien scholar, he says, there is only one actor in the world that can play this part. At which point I was sort of puffed my chest out a little bit. James Earl Jones.
Thank you.
I told James that. He said, well, he's probably right. Anyway, I thank you for the question. It is the hardest part. It's the part I feel I most completely failed in, and I don't know how to do it. I still think about it. Every actor should learn from his experience. My experience is I still don't know how to do it.
Switching gears to the Indiana Jones franchise, one of my favorite scenes from The Last Crusade is the run scene with Marcus Brody where you punch someone through a newspaper. I was wondering what your favorite scene was to film from any of the Indiana Jones movies and what it was like to reprise the character for the 2023 film.
Well, I'll deal with the last bit first. I got asked to do it, and I said, what do you mean? The part isn't good enough. It will cheat the audience. And they came back and they said, oh, no, we're going to build more parts. And I said, no, you're not. No, you're not. And then they showed me some new scenes. And I said, well, it's still too small, but... And of course you've got your manager and everybody else saying, you've got to be in the last Indiana Jones film. So I said, all right, but but let's make sure that these, we're doing this. The moment I signed the contract, those scenes vanished, of course, which I think is a bit of a shame because there's something real about the relationship of Sarah and Marion with Indiana. And I'm not sure that the last film really has a depth of feeling between the characters. I mean, it's just my jealousy, envy, and prejudice, I suppose, but it does seem to me that at the great point of making a trilogy is you watch these characters over the years and how they've changed and developed, but the fact that the core relationship is still there. And I think it's partly borne out by the fact it's not been the big hit that everyone was expecting it to be. In a year that actually has got some big hits. But I think the big films of the year are a little bit flawed as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Barbie, I saw, it really sounds just like an advert for the manufacturing company, to me at least. The Atom Bomb film is, again, it doesn't really get to the core of that intellectual excitement as far as I'm concerned. And that lovely man who's just done that thing on Bernstein, or Bernstein, isn't it really? That film seems to be modeled as well in its thinking. I mean, he's a monster, but then we can make good films about monsters. But using the Mahler at the end of it, what a mistake. Mahler could never work out when his symphony had ended, so he kept adding ends to it. You come to the climax of the end of the resurrection, and then it's another one, and then another one, and then another one, and then they try to bundle them all up in one bigger one, and then that's not enough, so you do a bigger one. I'm not a Mahler fan, really. Actually, that's not really true. He's marvelous, but I can be mean and spiteful along with the rest. Okay, we've actually gone 2 minutes over, but are they besieging us backstage? Are they telling us get off quick? No, see, all right, now the question.
So I used to coach speech and debate, and I loved watching you in so many films where your voice is still yours, but it also has the character. And having had so many of my students struggle with that, I was just wondering what your approach was to making sure that you sound like you, but also a character at the same time, because I think it's an incredible skill.
I grew up in the age of radio. If you wanted to pretend to be an American, you listened to English actors pretending to be Americans, and you did it like that, or you really got into Guys and Dolls, and we listened. And it is listening and repetition that gives you the vocal variety that you need. So there is that, and more than that, I worked on the stage, and the stage is a wonderfully demanding thing. But you see, we didn't have microphones in our day.
So I still believe that I can be heard clearly at the back of the theater.
Thank you, John. They've come to drag me away, ho ho. All right, listen, you've been a wonderful audience. You're in.